Alright, so in this video we'll be discussing if Pat Shurmur deserves to be fired. So, I mean, in my opinion, honestly, I wouldn't fire him just for the sake of firing him. I think you have to have a candidate that's going to replace him that's better than him. You don't want to fire Pat Shurmur and bring in somebody worse than Pat Shurmur or equal to Pat Shurmur. That would make no sense to me. So if they're going to fire him and bring in someone like Matt Rule or Bill Belichick, then yeah, by all means, you can fire him. But you can't fire him for no reason. So make sure you have a backup candidate. That's the number one thing right there. For the future of this channel, there's going to be some videos or highlight videos coming out for most Giants players this year. I don't have like a list in front of me, but so far I've been working on Daniel Jones and Saquon. I'll be doing like the wide receivers, Caden Smith, maybe Evan Engram, maybe some offensive linemen you guys like, and of course a lot of the defensive players as well. Not Antoine Bethea or Alec Ogletree. They will not be included. There's probably not any highlights anyway. I could make like a whole montage of them making terrible plays if you guys want to see that, but I can't do highlights for those guys. So that'll be it for the future of the channel, and now let's get into does Pat Shurmur deserve to be fired next Monday? So a lot of this video will be me defending why he should be back and giving some reasons why he should be back. Here's reason number one. Shurmur was a big reason this team drafted Daniel Jones in the first place. I know we all want to pin that on GETTLEMAN, but at the same time, Pat Shurmur's perfect quarterback is kind of like a Daniel Jones type of guy. A guy that's very accurate in the intermediate passing game. A guy that can move outside the pocket, has some mobility as well. So you can see why Pat Shurmur would like him. He kind of does some of the things Case Keenum did, but even better when Case Keenum had that great year in 2017. So we give GETTLEMAN a pass because, he found the franchise quarterback, or at least we think that. But at the same time, we don't give Pat Shurmur the credit for being a part of drafting the kid and even developing him to the passer he is now. I mean, he's a lot better than what I saw at Duke last year. I mean, I know the ball security is still an issue, obviously, but at the same time, you have to give Coach Shurmur a lot of credit for what Daniel Jones has become. And I see people in the comments trying to attribute his success to Eli Manning or Mike Shula. And maybe they deserve some credit, but I think most of the credit goes to Pat Shurmur. And even Daniel Jones talked about it, how Pat Shurmur has definitely helped him since being drafted and making him a better player and stuff like that. So that right there is my number one reason for having Pat Shurmur back next year. So reason number two, I kind of just touched up on it, but this was a different reason technically. I mean, the first one was drafting him. This is developing him. He has helped develop Daniel Jones, obviously. So Jones right now is honestly one of the top three frontrunners for Offensive Rookie of the Year, which is fantastic, especially for how bad most of us thought this pick was in late April. And right now, I mean, his completion percentage at 62, 2,700 yards, 23 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions, and 88 quarterback rating, basically 89. So having an over 2-to-1 touchdown interception ratio, especially for a rookie quarterback, is fantastic. You love hearing that. So I mean, he's been a big part of developing this kid, and I think we need to give him some credit for it. So I know people, as I said, they want to give Eli and Mike Shula all this kind of credit, but we don't want to give credit to the main reason why Daniel Jones has developed into a better player this year, which is Pat Shurmur. I don't know, some of you just have like a personal hate for the guy. I don't get it. I'm trying to judge things as I see it, and I think Pat Shurmur's been a big part of it, so that's another reason why he deserves to stay next year as well. Reason number three, some key players on the team don't want him fired, and by key players, I mean their two best offensive players, one being Daniel Jones, the other Saquon Barkley. So I believe Saquon's quote was something along the lines of that he believes Shurmur is the right guy for the job or something like that. Daniel Jones went on to touch on this. He said, I think he's a great coach, how he's coached me. He has been very important for my development, as I got into before. So I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to work with him. I've really enjoyed working with Coach Shurmur, and I think he's done a whole lot of development for my growth. He's been great for me. So, I mean, he's talking about how great he's been, Pat Shurmur, for Daniel Jones' development. And look, I mean, if your key players don't want you fired, you obviously must be doing something right. There's a reason later I'll touch on that has something to do with this, but right here you have two guys, two of your best players on offense coming to your defense. I think that's a good sign right there. If they didn't really want him back, I think they could have said something else. They're obviously not going to say to the media, I want him fired. They would have an answer like, well, we'll see what happens. It's out of my control or something like that. But no, these guys are coming to his defense, so you have to realize that his two best players definitely want him back next year as well. Reason number four is they have one of the youngest rosters in the league. So this was my original defense for Pat Shurmur because like around like week 7, 8, 6, whatever it was, when people really started like turning against him. My argument was like there's no coach that's going to win with this type of roster. This is not a win now team. Of course, in the preseason, there's fans that say like, oh, 10-6, 11-5 will make the playoffs, and that's just not realistic in my mind. So my expectations were 7 wins, 8 wins at the most, or something like that. So of course, having 4 or 5 wins this year is a little underachieving in my mind, but at the same time, this is a historically young roster. I mean, I think based off the average age in the league, they're kind of like, I think they're like 10th or 11th, but if you take like Eli Manning and like Zach Diassi off the roster, then it probably gets a lot younger, guys like that. But you have Julian Love is still 21, DeAndre Baker's 22, Daniel Jones, Saquon, Darius Slayton, Dexter Lawrence, they're all 22. The 23-year-olds are O'Shane, Zimenez, Corey Ballantyne, Sam Beal, Grant Haley. 24-year-olds, you have Lorenzo Carter, Will Hernandez, even Nick Gates, who started a couple games this year, BJ Hill, Jabril Peppers, and Ryan Conley, who did start like 3 games for us as well before his injury. So these are a lot of guys that they're just development players. I mean, of course, Saquon Barkley's a star already. Daniel Jones has not hit his ceiling yet. DeAndre Baker is still developing. I mean, there's probably one guy on this list that's like reached his max potential, and that's Saquon Barkley. So, I mean, these are guys that need time, and I'm definitely aware of that. But at the same time, you have to give your head coach a pass in a way, because this is not a win-now roster. And I feel a lot of people, especially New York fans, have these false expectations. They want to win now and stuff like that. But you have to realize these guys are young, and then it's not going to happen this soon. I mean, as I said in August, I mean, next year's the year, 2020, where they have to start winning. If they have another, terrible year next year and have 3 or 4 wins once again, that's it. I mean, even if they bring Shurmur and Gettleman back next year, that's it. If they go 3-4 wins next year, it's definitely over at that point. Even if they go like maybe 6-10, it might be over. They have to have pretty high expectations for 2020. So, I mean, these guys, it's a developmental year for them. I don't think it should all be placed on Pat Shurmur's shoulders. There's really not much many coaches, probably 95% of coaches in this league, could do with this roster. Could they have had a couple more wins? Yes, but at the same time, this was not a playoff roster to begin with, and hopefully most people, I feel like, are not aware of that, but some people do, so I appreciate fans like that, but at the same time, this was not a win-now roster. So reason number 5, and this is the biggest one for me, you're most likely going to bring Dave Gettleman back anyway. So as we all know by now, Dave Gettleman is the reason that Pat Shurmur was hired as head coach here. He was a big reason for it, and I just don't understand how Gettleman can hire a head coach, his head coach fails, Gettleman keeps his job, head coach is fired. That makes no sense to me, because it's not like Gettleman gave this guy an A-plus roster, or even an A-minus roster, or even a B or B-plus roster to work with here. This is like a C-plus roster at best, and you're expecting Pat Shurmur to go out here and make the playoffs. I mean, Dave Gettleman tells us every preseason or every offseason, this is a win-now team. I expect to compete for the playoffs this year, all that kind of crap. It never happens. So I don't know how you can pin that all on Pat Shurmur. I mean, here's what happens. Dave Gettleman gives these fans false expectations every offseason. Say, oh yeah, we're going to compete for the division and try to, win now, all that type of stuff. We're not going to rebuild here. I don't believe in rebuilding. Pat Shurmur comes out here with this crappy roster, can't get any wins, and then you say to yourself, oh, well, this is obviously the head coach's fault because Dave Gettleman promised us the playoffs. Like, that's not how it works. I mean, this roster is not good enough. I just don't understand how, if Gettleman keeps his job for 2020 and Pat Shurmur's fired, that would make no sense to me. So if Gettleman was fired, I would say, okay, this whole video would make no sense, because like this is wholly for this reason right here. I mean, I think if Gettleman is back for 2020, you give these two guys one more year and say, look, make the playoffs or you're done. Like, that's basically it. So I don't really think there's a reason why you bring the GM back and not the head coach who hired him. It just doesn't make sense to me. So I mean, hopefully the Giants come to their senses with that one. I don't want a situation where you keep the GM and then not the head coach, and you have to worry about hiring the right head coach for the future that wants to work with the next GM, and it's just it's just a giant mess, honestly. So both of these guys came together in 2017. They were hired together. I think they should be fired or let go together. The only reason where I didn't think that should happen is if like Dave Gettleman retired early and Pat Shurmur had some success here and he stayed longer. That's the only reason. But outside of that, these guys should be hired and fired together, in my opinion. Reason number 6, the biggest deficiency on this team is the defense, and Pat Shurmur is an offensive coach. So I went back and just wrote down some of the ranks in the league. Right now, the Giants have 21.6 points per game offensively. That's 19th in the NFL. Tiny bit below average, but still not that bad. Yards per game at 334.6, 23rd in the NFL. I mean, that's bottom third of the league, but still, it's not terrible. It's not, 30, 31, 32. The turnover ratio is minus 15, the third most in the NFL. And a lot of that has to do with your rookie quarterback fumbling the ball. I don't know how that's Pat Shurmur's fault. I mean, Dave Cutcliffe and Duke couldn't have fixed this problem as well. Hopefully it's fixed next year with a full off season, knowing this is a big issue, so we'll see next year if Jones continues the fumbles or not. You look at their defense now, different story. Points per game allowed, 27.8, third most in the NFL. Yards allowed per game, 375, ninth most in the NFL. And then yards allowed per play is tied for 10th most in the NFL. So I understand, like you say, this is a head coach. He should control the whole team. But Pat Shurmur's not here calling out defensive plays. He's not bringing in the defensive personnel. I'm sure he has to say over who he wants to play and all that type of stuff. But Pat Shurmur doesn't control who's on the roster, obviously. So that's a different story. But, it's not Shurmur's fault that Alec Ogletree, who probably runs like a 5'2", 40, is playing inside linebacker for him. And Antoine Bethea, who doesn't understand angles or how to cover anybody. That's not his fault. So, James Bettcher is a big reason why this defense is terrible. The lack of talent is a big reason why the defense is terrible. And Pat Shurmur is a very small reason why the defense is terrible. So, offensively, this team hasn't been that bad this year. He's had a rookie quarterback who's put up some great numbers, could win Offensive Rookie of the Year. He's had the corpse of Eli Manning to start 4 games as well. And it hasn't been that bad. So, he definitely deserves some credit and some leeway because this defense is awful. And, hopefully with some better talent and some money to spend this offseason, it gets more talented. And we'll see what happens. But that's exactly what happened in 2016, right? You give a crappy coach like Ben McAdoo some more defensive talent. We'll add Janoris Jenkins, who was locked down that year, Snacks Harrison, the best run stopper, the first couple of years he was signed, and Olivier Vernon, who was pretty effective his first couple of years. You sign those guys, and all of a sudden you have this great defense. And I hope that's what happens next year. I don't think Pat Shurmur's the worst coach in the league. I think if you give him some defensive talent, they can work with it. This team definitely needs a better defensive coordinator for sure. I don't think Betcher's the guy for the job, and the whole 3-4 defense has not worked out so far. But at the same time, if you have a good defense here, and Shurmur's putting up some better numbers offensively, just a little better. Like if you go from 21 points per game this year to like 24, 25 next year, that's great. If you're averaging like around 380 yards per game or something and improve the turnover ratio, that's fantastic. And I think they'll be a much better team next year if they have some talent defensively and a better defensive coordinator as well. So this is probably like the worst reasons of them all, but Pat Shurmur's contract after this year still has 3 more years on it. I believe he signed a 5-year deal when he was signed for like $25 million, I think would be the number. So 5-year, $25 million deal. After this year, still has 3 years and $15 million left on his contract. And that shouldn't be the whole reason why he stays, but it's definitely going to be on ownership's mind. They don't want to pay a guy who's not even coaching the team that much money over the next 3 years. So that's another reason why the Giants are still paying Ben McAdoo up until this offseason. So currently they're still paying him. He signed a 4-year contract back in 2016. So this is the last year they have to pay him. But at the same time, it probably eats away at management that they have to pay 2 coaches, one that hasn't been here since the middle of 2017, and another who's on the verge of possibly getting fired. So that has to eat away at them and could factor into their decision for keeping Shurmur next year. That shouldn't be the whole decision. Obviously, this is a billion-dollar industry here, but at the same time, it's definitely going to factor into their decision-making a little bit. So reason number 8, he never lost the locker room like McAdoo did. So of course we know in 2017 when McAdoo was fired in the middle of the year, he definitely lost the locker room. There were like 3 defensive backs or 2 defensive backs that got suspended. 1 safety called a cornerback a cancer and stuff like that. So a lot of bad things going on there. But this locker room has not been nearly as bad. It's been like a much better, just the whole vibe around this team as compared to what it was 2 years ago. There were definitely more personalities on that team 2 years ago, but at the same time, Pat Shurmur the last 2 years has found a way to motivate this team. Even last year, starting 1-7, I think they finished the year at 4-4. They played some easier opponents, of course, but still, their team showed up every game. They started putting up a lot of points the second half of last year. This year, they started off, I'm trying to think how bad the record was at this point. What were the Giants? 2-11, I think, this year. I think they were 2-11. Now they've won, is it 3 out of 4? No, two out of three, whatever it is. So I mean, still, Pat Shurmur is getting this team ready to play and somehow still motivating them. So that says a lot. I mean, a lot of guys at this point in their career probably would just say like, whatever, we'll play for next year. But a lot of guys are motivated to still play. And that says a lot about the head coach. A lot of guys are motivated for this game against Philadelphia, of course. So, that says a lot about your head coach. I mean, I know the talent here isn't great, but if Pat Shurmur's getting them ready to play and getting them excited, even when they're 1-7, 2-10, whatever the record is, and getting them to go out there and play hard, that says a lot about your coach, honestly, whether you want to admit it or not. So, I mean, that's my last argument for him. I'm sure there's a couple others in there as well, but if I had to choose, I'd rather pick Matt Rule and start fresh, have a new GM as well, but I just don't think the Giants will go that direction right now. I'm leaning towards Gettleman stays. I'm 50-50 on Shurmur right now, but we'll see what happens with that. But if you find out Monday that Shurmur's going to return, you can go back and watch this video and maybe realize it's not so bad. So hopefully this video helps some of you guys cope with the idea that he might be back. I mean, as I said, I would rather have a Matt Rule or somebody like that, but we'll see what happens on Monday. So thanks for watching, guys, and I'll talk to you next time.